The old man died on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, 6 men who had sworn their lives to him were already planning how to take what he left behind. Kenji Arata had ruled the Arata Syndicate for 31 years without raising his voice a single time. He never needed to. Men who crossed him simply disappeared, quietly, without ceremony, the way he handled everything. He built an empire out of shipping routes, private banks, and silence. And when his heart finally stopped beating in the back room of a closed tea house in Yokohama, that silence became a weapon pointed at everyone who had ever depended on him. There was no warning, no illness, just an old man slumped in his chair, a cup of untouched tea going cold beside him, and a single sealed envelope sitting on the table in front of him, addressed to no one. Subscribe and stay until the end, because the name inside that envelope was about to tear an empire apart. For 17 hours, nobody touched the envelope. The 5 men who considered themselves heirs to Arata's throne circled it like wolves, circling a carcass they were too afraid to claim. Daisuke Mori believed the throne was his because he had earned it. For 22 years, he had been Arata's right hand, the man who carried out every order without question, who buried the bodies and silenced the witnesses and never once asked why. Ren Takahashi believed it because he was smarter than every other man in the room combined, and he knew it. He had quadrupled the syndicate's offshore holdings in less than a decade, turning Arata's old-world criminal network into something resembling a financial institution with teeth. He viewed loyalty as a tool rather than a virtue. Hirosato believed it because of blood. He was Arata's nephew, the closest thing to family the old man had left. He had spent his entire adult life waiting in rooms just like this one, certain the throne belonged to him simply because the bloodline demanded it. And then there was a 5th name nobody dared speak aloud yet, because the woman it belonged to wasn't even in the room. Her name was Aiko Nakamura, and she had not set foot inside Arata's organization in 9 years. Nobody had called her. Nobody had thought to. But somebody had. Daisuke finally broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, in Arata's unmistakable handwriting, was written a name that made every man in that room go pale. It was not Daisuke's name. It was not Ren's name. It was not Hiro's name. The room exploded into noise the moment the name was read aloud. Accusations flew. Someone overturned a chair. Saito, a quiet, aging lieutenant who had said almost nothing since arriving, simply watched with an expression none of them had seen on him before. But the true storm hadn't even begun, because somewhere across the city, the woman whose name had just been spoken aloud was about to receive a phone call that would change everything she thought she understood about her past. Aiko Nakamura had spent 9 years building a life that had nothing to do with shipping containers, hidden ledgers, or men who solved problems with violence. She owned a small restaurant near the harbor. She kept the scars of her old life hidden beneath long sleeves and a guarded smile, and had promised herself every single day for 9 years that she would never go back. She had been Arata's most trusted strategist once, before the betrayal that drove her out. Before the night that ended with her walking away from the only family she had ever known, bleeding from a wound she never let anyone see, swearing she would rather die in obscurity than serve a man who let her be sacrificed to protect someone else. She had hated Kenji Arata for 9 years, and now, from beyond death itself, he had handed her the one thing she swore she never wanted again. The phone call came at 11 at night from a lawyer she had never met. "Miss Nakamura, you have been named successor to his organization. I need you to come in person. There are people who will not wait." Aiko did not say yes, but she did not hang up either, and that single hesitation would set in motion everything that followed. By the time Aiko arrived at the old tea house the next morning, word had already spread through every layer of the organization. A woman who had walked away nearly a decade earlier had been chosen over 3 men who had given their entire lives to the throne. "This is a mistake," Hiro said before she had even taken a seat. "You abandoned this family. And now you think you can walk back in and take what the rest of us built?" "I didn't ask for this," Aiko said quietly, her voice silencing the room despite carrying none of its violence. "He's the only one who trusted me to finish this." "Trust," Ren repeated, contempt sharpening the word. "He trusted you so much he let you disappear for 9 years without a word." Something darker passed behind Aiko's eyes. He didn't let me disappear, she said. He made sure I had no other choice. Nobody understood what she meant, not yet. But Saito, watching from the back wall, understood exactly, and the flicker of recognition on his face did not go unnoticed. That night, 3 men who had spent the day pretending to accept Arata's decision sat together without pretending anything at all. "She will not survive a month," Hiro said. "She doesn't need to," Ren replied, swirling a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. "She only needs to survive long enough to sign over control. After that, what happens to her is irrelevant." Daisuke said nothing for a long moment. The old man did not choose her by accident. If we move against her without understanding why, we are walking into something we cannot see. "Then we find out why," Ren said, quietly, "and then we remove her." None of them noticed Saito standing just outside the door, listening to every word. 3 days later, Aiko sat alone in Arata's old office, surrounded by ledgers and photographs of an empire she had once helped build. Tucked inside the false bottom of his desk drawer, she found a second letter, written only for her. It began with 4 words that stopped her breath entirely. "You were right, Aiko." For 9 years, she had believed Arata sacrificed her to protect a traitor inside his own ranks. The letter confirmed it in his own hand. There had been a traitor, he had known, and rather than expose him, he had chosen to sacrifice her instead, believing it would buy peace during a fragile moment when war would have destroyed everything he built. "I was wrong to let it happen," the letter read. "I am giving you what I should have protected for you from the beginning, because you are the only person I have ever known who chose principle over survival. The traitor I protected that night is still inside these walls, Aiko. Find him before he finds you." Someone in that room 3 days earlier, someone who had stood beside her pretending to mourn a man he had once betrayed, was the very reason her life had been destroyed 9 years ago. And that same man was now circling her, believing she still didn't know. The first attempt on her life came 4 nights later, disguised as a gas leak in her apartment, reported by a neighbor who did not exist. She smelled it the moment she walked through her door, deliberate, the kind of detail a professional would engineer with precision. She did not panic. She opened every window, walked outside, and sat across the street for 20 minutes, watching to see who might come to confirm the job had been finished. Nobody came. Whoever arranged it had stayed far away. But careful was not the same as perfect, and Aiko had spent her life learning the difference. The next morning she requested a private meeting with Saito in a crowded noodle shop near the harbor. "You knew," she said the moment he sat down. 9 years ago. You knew, and you said nothing. I was not in a position to say anything that would have changed the outcome." He folded his weathered hands. "I have known his name since the night it happened, and I let fear keep me from doing anything about it." "Then tell me now." Saito's voice dropped to a whisper. "It was never Hiro. He's weak, but not the architect of anything. And it was never Daisuke. It's Ren. It was always Ren." The revelation landed like a blade between the ribs. The brilliant strategist who spoke of loyalty as a tool rather than a virtue had been the traitor responsible for everything Aiko lost 9 years ago. And now he was orchestrating her removal from the throne Arata had given her. Aiko spent the next several days rebuilding, piece by piece, the financial trail Ren had spent a decade trying to erase. Ren had not simply betrayed her once and walked away clean. He had spent every year since quietly siphoning resources into shell companies across 3 countries. The empire he had built in Arata's name was partially built on theft so meticulous even Arata himself had never detected it. Arata had discovered it months before his death. He had not lived long enough to expose it himself, but long enough to understand that only one person possessed both the skill to uncover it and the integrity to act once she did. He had not chosen Aiko out of guilt alone. He had chosen her because she was the only weapon sharp enough to cut through the rot he could no longer cut through himself. Daisuke found her late one evening in Arata's office, surrounded by the proof. He had come to confront her about taking the throne. He left hours later as her ally. "I should have seen it," he said quietly. 22 years, and I never saw it." "He's been good for a very long time," Aiko said. "That's what makes him dangerous." "What happens now?" Now we make sure that the next time he tries to kill me, it's the last mistake he ever makes. The second attempt came faster than anyone expected, and this time, Ren did not bother disguising it as an accident. 3 armed men ambushed Aiko's car on a narrow service road, boxing her vehicle between 2 trucks. The first shots shattered her rear window. For a moment, it seemed certain the ambush would succeed. Then headlights flooded the road from behind, and a second vehicle slammed into the rear truck. Daisuke emerged already firing. Within 90 seconds, 2 attackers lay dead. The third fled, but not before Daisuke put a bullet through his shoulder. They found him 2 blocks away, too weak to run further. He did not require much persuasion to talk. Ren had hired them. Ren had paid in advance. He wanted her death to look like the chaotic result of organizational instability, proof that the throne itself was cursed under a woman's leadership. What he had not counted on was Daisuke choosing truth over convenience, and that single miscalculation would cost him everything. The confrontation came 2 nights later, in the same room where Arata's will had first been read aloud. Aiko called every remaining lieutenant to the table, including Ren, who arrived still believing his secret remained buried. That confidence lasted exactly as long as it took her to place a single folder in front of him. "Open it." Ren's eyes flicked to the folder, then to her, searching for a bluff. He found none. The color drained from his face as he flipped through page after page of records that should have been impossible to recover. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, his voice tighter than before. "It proves everything," Aiko replied. 9 years of theft, a betrayal you orchestrated to destroy me before I could expose you. 2 attempts on my life in the last week alone, paid for with money stolen from this organization." The room had gone utterly silent. Hiro stared at Ren, realizing how close he had come to allying with a monster. Saito simply watched, having waited 9 years for this exact moment. Ren's composure cracked at last. "You think this changes anything?" he snapped, rising. "I built half of what this organization is today. I deserve more than a folder of stolen documents thrown at me by a woman who abandoned this family 9 years ago." "I didn't abandon anything," Aiko said, steady despite the venom in his voice. "You made certain I had no other choice. And now everyone in this room finally sees exactly who you are." Daisuke stepped between Ren and the door. Hiro, for the first time in his life, chose a side without hesitation, blocking the second exit. Even Saito finally stood, his presence alone removing any illusion of escape. Ren looked around the room, searching for an ally who no longer existed. There was none. What happened to Ren Takahashi that night was never spoken of outside that room. Some forms of justice inside an organization built on silence are never meant to be witnessed by the outside world. What mattered was the outcome. The traitor who destroyed Aiko's life 9 years earlier finally paid the price he had spent a decade avoiding. By dawn, the throne that had been fractured by ambition and betrayal stood unified for the first time since Kenji Arata's death. Daisuke remained her most trusted enforcer, his loyalty no longer divided, but settled into respect. Hiro, humbled by how close he came to choosing the wrong side, dedicated himself to proving his worth, rather than demanding it through bloodline. Saito, finally free of 9 years of guilt, became the quiet advisor he had always been capable of being, and Aiko Nakamura, the woman who had walked away believing she would never return, sat once more in the chair that had belonged to the only man who ever truly understood what she was capable of becoming. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the heavy weight of inheritance, the understanding that the throne had cost more lives than it would ever be worth, and that every decision from this point forward would carry consequences far beyond herself. Months later, sitting alone in the same office where she once found Arata's final letter, Aiko allowed herself, for the first time, to simply breathe. The empire was hers now, not because she had wanted it, but because a dying man had recognized, in his final letter, the one truth that mattered above all the wealth and power he had spent his life accumulating. Loyalty built on convenience always breaks under pressure. Loyalty built on principle is the only kind that survives. Kenji Arata had spent 31 years ruling through silence and fear, but his final act, written in trembling handwriting on a single sheet of paper, had been an act of something far rarer inside this world. It had been an act of trust, And in the end, that single act of trust had rebuilt an empire that violence alone could never have held together.